because you were the first. It was the beginning. It was the beginning of everything that we take for granted now on YouTube, social media, everything. Was you were the beginning. I don't remember people particularly refusing to talk to you or, all that. Whereas now you have to go through 9 PRs and it's like, I'm sorry you can't, I'm sorry we're not filming, I'm sorry there isn't room, but it's got more and more and more difficult. And if I want a quote from a designer, sometimes it takes me 3 months to get it, and we've gone to press. When I was a student back in the early 1960s, English colleges had a relationship with the Chambre Syndicale, as it then was, run by Madame Marjorie Dunton. And couture in those days was still shown every afternoon. So the premiere shows and then the first few weeks were selling. Students could go about the second to the third month that they were still showing the same season. So if they showed in January, we could go probably April time. So I, as a student in my very first year, discovered we could go. You had to pay a ridiculously small caution, even by the standards of the day. It was something silly, like 4 francs, I think, per show. And no more than 3 students were ever allowed at any one time in a show. So if 3 of you went to Dior one afternoon, 3 of you might go to Dior the following afternoon. And I was incredibly lucky because I went to couture. I saw the Yves Saint Laurent African collection in the original salons. I saw Marc Bohan couture. And because I was amongst very few boys in fashion at that time, and B, once I went, I tried to save up and go often. Madame Dunton was incredibly good to me. And during that time, Dior launched ready to wear. There would be no boutique ready to wear. And she organized for a vendeuse to take me through it. And she also organized for me to see Madame Gray, who normally didn't allow students in. And she told me that when I got there, I was to make certain that if they said no, they phoned her. And I got there and they said, no, you can't come in. And I said, will you please phone Madame Dunton? And they phoned her. And I could hear them arguing on the phone, and eventually they had to put me. So I even saw Madame Gray. So my couture experience started when it was still selling. By the time I left college, everything had changed through the 70s into the 80s. Couture was not what it was, but it was still important. People like Nina Ricci and Lanvin and people like that, the ready-to-wear was minimal. They were still making a lot of money through couture. But by the time the 70s into the 80s came, it had all started to change. But during my lifespan of going to couture, it's been killed off more times than an Agatha Christie, murder mystery. The super rich are not in a restaurant. The chef is cooking in their kitchen. They are not on a smart beach. They own a beach. And they're not in first class. They own a plane. I, over the years, have interviewed a lot of clients, many of whom I've no idea on their names because I've made that part of the deal, that they will talk to me. I've spoken to Pakistani princesses. I've spoken to women whose profession is one of the oldest in the world, let us just say, at the highest level of shopping at couture. And I've had them explain reasons why they go to couture. Things like, I don't like my neck, so all my clothes are cut and shaped and positioned so my neck looks longer with a couture collar. And I remember when Margiela launched Artisanal, them saying to me, because you realize everybody in the team is insane. And I said, yes. And that's what they were. They were insane. And in that fashion sense of being insane, to say, right, we're going to make a dress out of old sandals. which we will buy in the puce, and we will soak, and we will pick apart, and we will flatten, and we will then sew them together. So we make like a brown leather lace dress out of old sandals. I mean, it's insanity. It was like being hit, like the first Comme des Garçons. When, if you think about Comme des Garçons in '83, I think it was '83 or '84, when it first came out, at that same moment, Mugler and Montana were in full spate, and we were about to hit Dynasty. We just had the royal wedding in England with Princess Diana wearing the Emmanuel ball gown, and she sends out sweaters with holes in, and you know, Linda, I've forgotten her name, who did the makeup, who I knew, the makeup was smears of colour across their faces. Yeah. And you just went, oh my God. And the friend who I worked with, who I was with, Hilary, known as Willie, she looked at me and she said, I can't draw it. I don't know how it works. She was like going through her notebook, like we were trying to take notes, but we couldn't. Nothing before it had been like it. And the same with Margiela, because Margiela did the same thing, was that where everything was broad-shouldered, he did this tiny armhole that went up like this. And where everything was coloured, everything was these dark, really saturated, dark, dense, unshiny fabrics. And you're like, I don't understand. What's though interesting as well is that I used to go to all the Yves Saint Laurent shows towards the end. And whatever was wrong was still better than most other people. He was tired and he wasn't doing anything new, but it was still extraordinary. And also, because I knew the whole of his output, you never quite knew which bits he was going to suddenly reference. And I always remember that suddenly in one collection, he sent out the sort of Magyar Hungarian blouses. And I went, oh my God, I haven't seen those for so long. And again, with Saint Laurent, people forget that in 1971, when he did the 1940s collection, it was considered so shocking, it offended the French. What you realize is 45, 55, 65, it was barely 20 years after the war. I'm a just post-war baby. What people forget is post-war carried on into the 50s. Post-war didn't happen the day, everything but finished. The war went on for a very, very long time. And in lots of countries, people look at Oxford Street now. And I remember when John Lewis was a bomb site. It had been bombed and it was a ground floor and a basement. And it wasn't rebuilt until 1955, 10 years after the war. The coronation was so important to the Brits because that was the year rationing finally finished in England. Wow. 8 years after the war had ended. Another thing about history and fashion and change is that when we look at 47, which Christian Dior started in 46, because it was shown early in 47. He started in 46. The offensiveness of it was that rationing and privation and starvation was still all over the place. And women were going, how dare this man show me these huge skirts when I haven't had a new coat for 7 years? You can be 16 and have a very bad day and feel 104, but you're still 16. And I think you can be 40 and be very naive. And I think you can be 12 and be very sophisticated. I think age is such a lottery. And on a bad day, I feel 193. And on a good day, I feel 27, not 27, but whatever. I'm fine. I think the annoying thing is that I've got less time in front of me than I have behind me, because there's still a lot I haven't done and I want to do. So keeping a lot of things I still want to do, and I hate the expression bucket list because it's not a bucket list. It's things I am planning to do, and it's not before I die, because that is, whatever it is. But it's also the luck of the draw. If you can get out of bed in the morning, shower and get dressed, and do it without pain or without taking vast quantities of medication or without help and support, as you get older, it becomes a bonus. And I am aware that there are people who are half my age who life is a burden. It's tough. So, without wanting to sound like some hideous little do-gooder in a poke bonnet, in a sort of Victorian sampler, I count my blessings. Not all the time, but I know they're there.